Hi everyone, I'm Alessandro, and for more than 30 years, I've been building internet infrastructure and digital services for European businesses. Every week on this channel, we explore privacy, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, digital sovereignty, and the technologies shaping Europe's digital future. Let's get started. Over the last few days, I came across an interesting discussion online. Someone claimed that the European AI Act isn't really enforced because many of the implementing measures are still missing. My first reaction was simple. That can't be true. The AI Act has been approved, it's been published. Some of its provisions are already being applied. So, how could anyone say that it isn't really operational? The more I looked into it, though, the more I realized that the answer isn't as simple as either yes or no. And I think there's a lesson here that goes well beyond artificial intelligence. When most people hear the words new regulation, they imagine that Parliament approves a law, it gets published, and from that day on, everyone simply follows it. Reality is rarely that simple, especially when the regulation covers an industry that evolves as quickly as artificial intelligence. A regulation can establish principles, it can define obligations, it can even specify penalties, but that doesn't automatically tell companies exactly how compliance should work in practice. That's where implementing acts, delegated acts, harmonized standards, and official guidelines become essential. Without them, companies often know what the objective is, but not always the exact path to get there. When I started reading the official European documents, I discovered something interesting. The AI Act itself has not been suspended. It is progressively entering into application according to a timeline established by the European Union. At the same time, however, Europe has acknowledged that some of the technical ecosystem needed to support the regulation is still being completed. Some obligations have even been postponed to allow additional time for standards, common specifications, and implementation guidance to be finalized. As always, every official source I'm referring to is available in the description below. Now, if you're running a business, this distinction matters because there's a huge difference between saying the regulation doesn't exist and saying the regulation exists, but parts of the implementation framework are still evolving. Those are two completely different situations. The first creates legal uncertainty, the second creates operational uncertainty. And if you've ever managed a technology company, you know that operational uncertainty can be just as challenging. You know the destination, you're just waiting for the road signs. This is actually something we've seen before. Not only in artificial intelligence, many major European regulations become more detailed over time. The law establishes the framework, then regulators, standards organizations, and technical experts build the practical tools that allow companies to comply consistently. In other words, writing the law is only the beginning. Building the ecosystem around that law is often the much bigger project. And I think this is where many public discussions become misleading. Some people conclude that the AI Act has failed because parts of the implementation are still being developed. Others argue that Europe is regulating too quickly. Personally, I don't think either conclusion captures what's really happening. What I see is Europe attempting something incredibly ambitious. It's trying to regulate one of the fastest moving technologies in history while that technology continues changing almost every month. That was never going to be easy. As someone who spent more than 30 years working with internet infrastructure, I've learned that technology almost always moves faster than regulation. But regulation doesn't need to move faster than technology. It needs to provide enough certainty for businesses to invest with confidence. That's the real challenge. And that's exactly why these implementing measures matter so much. They're not bureaucratic details, they're the bridge between political decisions and real world implementation. Without that bridge, companies are left interpreting the law on their own. So maybe the real question isn't whether Europe is regulating artificial intelligence too much or too little. Maybe the real question is whether Europe can build the practical tools that businesses need quickly enough to keep pace with artificial intelligence itself. Because in the end, a regulation isn't judged by how well it's written, it's judged by whether businesses can realistically apply it. And I think that's the discussion we should all be having. If you found this video useful, subscribe to the channel Every week, we explore the technology